Alright, here's a big acrylic that I've done, and when we were talking before, we drew a tic-tac-toe by putting vertical lines and horizontal lines, and I talked about how important the corners were and the edges. So in fact, I don't even worry about the center because the center is going to take care of itself. But when I look at these, I want to have, let's take the bottom section. I want to have the bottom to be a good composition by itself. So I want to look at that just in an abstract way and say, how is that divided and does it look nice? And so if we start looking at the bottom edge, we've got basically one section, two sections, three sections. So we've kind of divided that up into thirds. And if we look at this right hand side, it's also divided up basically into thirds. Look on the left hand side, I don't know how you would divide that up. Maybe 2/3 there and 1/3 there. Across the top, again we're going about 2/3 of the way and 1/3. If you start thinking about the corners, I want all the corners to be different. And I want them to do something special for me. Okay? So I have this big, I really like that guy. A very beautiful corner. Here's another with that butterfly, a blue morpho growing. And then a corner here that I really like. And then a corner here. And they sort of work together. This works as a unit, this green, that green, that green, and into this big shape. Works as a unit that goes all the way across. This big green shape works as a unit. This works pretty good here. This flower here goes up and then connects with those things. So to me, I think the whole thing works as a kind of circle going around the canvas, and then I hope, this was my goal anyway, that these curves will bring you back into it, and that these curves would also bring you back into the center. And here, and on this is just kind of a decorative thing. Let's stop there, and I'm going to show another one. Okay, so here's a second painting, or a second big acrylic painting that I'm working on. Well, actually it's finished, but I want to talk to you about how we've divided the canvas up here. So if you look at it, and we look at our tic-tac-toe, we can take a line across here and say this is the upper edge, and it's divided kind of in threes again. We have this, we have this, and we have that. If you look on the edges, same situation. I have about 2/3 here and 1/3 there. If we look at this edge, again it's about 2/3 to 1/3. And then if we look at the lower edge, the bottom edge, we sort of have 1, 2, 3 parts to that. So what I want you to get used to is the idea of looking at these edges and asking yourself, is that a good painting as it exists at this moment? At least in an abstract sense. We wouldn't stop the painting there and have a long, narrow painting, but we could look at it and say, yeah, in an abstract sense, this works. And also, remember when we talked about our edges, we also talked about corners. So here I have a corner, and here we have a corner, and there a corner, and there a corner. They're all different, but they all do a certain amount of work. Okay, this pointing back to the center, this one doing the same thing. Actually, this one is just sort of existing. This one works pretty well about coming back down, and it also has a kind of focal point. I talked about having multiple focal points. So basically when you look at this, there's kind of a focal point here, and one here, and one here. I mean, they're all over the place, really. That's okay. I can deal with that. So when I'm talking about external composition, I'm always talking about how do we break up this rectangle. Later on, I'm going to put out another video, and we're going to talk about internal composition. And when I talk about internal composition, I mean things like creating depth, right? So we've got at least, you've heard people talk about foreground, middle ground, and background. Well, here we have a foreground, there we have a middle ground, and then this sky or sunset area, I would call that our background. If you look in there, I think it shows up on camera, there's like a very foggy set of trees or something back there. So that's one thing. Creating depth is part of the internal composition. The other part would be tying things together so that, for instance, this curve comes over and meets that. This begins to point to basically what is our central area. Our real focal point is probably about there. We have this leaf kind of pointing into the background. There's another leaf doing the same thing. And then we have also, and some other leaves pointing in, but also there's some other things going on. There's kind of a set of layers where we have a dark layer, an orange layer, another dark layer, and then there's finally a bluish background. And I deliberately took this bright yellow and made it go all the way across, just as a thing that tied it together from one end to the other. And so that's what I mean when I talk about internal, and we'll talk about that a whole lot in another video. Give me a subscribe or a like, all that helps. Thank you very much.